Your Day in Court, an educational introduction for persons who are deaf or hard of hearing. Produced by the Midwest Center on Law and the Deaf. This video was made possible with support from Ohio State Bar Foundation, Illinois Equal Justice Foundation, and Michigan State Bar Foundation. These foundations' funding does not constitute endorsement of any content or opinion expressed in these videos.
Today, we'll look at access to legal process, and more specifically, access to our courts. This video will introduce you to the roles of people in the courtroom, how you should dress and do while in court, and your rights under the Americans with Disabilities Act. To understand what happens in a courtroom, we must understand who each person is in the courtroom and what that person's role is. In many courthouses, there are two kinds of courts. One is the criminal court, which will decide if someone violated the law and must be punished with a fine or by spending time in prison, or both. The other kind of court is called civil. Civil courts handle many kinds of cases, such as adoptions, bankruptcies, wills, evictions, etc. The people in criminal court are different from the people in civil court.
Criminal court participants.
Let's look at a criminal courtroom. Criminal courts deal with defendants who are accused of committing crimes. In criminal courts, the government will charge and prosecute the defendant. Examples of crimes are murder, theft, assault, rape, traffic violations, drugs, and fraud. A criminal action is when a person has violated the law against the community. Now, let's look at who is involved in a typical criminal court.
Judge. I am the judge. In a criminal case, I listen to both sides. I listen to the prosecuting attorney that tries to prove a defendant violated the law and committed a crime. I also listen to the defendant's attorney that tries to defend the defendant. After listening to both sides, I usually let a jury decide if the defendant is guilty or not guilty. Sometimes there is no jury, and I will decide if the defendant is guilty or not guilty. Jury foreperson. We are the jury. I am one person from the jury. The jury picked me to be the foreman. I speak for the jury. The court appoints the jury, all of us, for the purpose of watching the whole trial. In a criminal case, after the lawyers are finished with their case, we, the jury, meet to discuss and decide if the criminal defendant is guilty or not guilty. Prosecutor. I am the prosecutor. I am an attorney who works for the government and makes sure people who violate the law are punished. Criminal defendant. I am the criminal defendant. The police and the government believe I violated the law. If the court finds me guilty of violating the law, I will be punished. I may have to pay a money fine or go to prison. Criminal defendant's attorney.
I am the criminal defense attorney. My job is to help the defendant and try to show that the government is wrong and that the defendant did not violate the law.
Witness.
I am a witness. In court, I swear to tell the truth, and then I tell what I saw or heard. In a criminal case, what a witness says may be important to the government or the defendant. The government can call its own witnesses, and the defendant can call different witnesses.
Bailiff. I am the bailiff. It is my job to make sure the courtroom is safe for all. I also make sure everyone is sitting in the right place. I help the judge ensure that everything in the courtroom proceeds smoothly. Court reporter.
I am the court reporter. My job is to type every word that is said in court for the record so that everyone can read it and know what happened in court. I also help the court to monitor all papers, photographs, guns, or other evidence given to the court for a trial.
Interpreter.
I am the interpreter. The court hires me to interpret. I am neutral and am not involved in the case. If anything is spoken in court, I interpret it into sign language for a deaf or hard of hearing person to understand. Anything that is signed in court, I interpret into spoken English for the hearing people to understand.
Civil court participants.
Let's look now at a civil courtroom. Civil courts deal with many different kinds of cases where there might be disagreements between people, and each group may have its own lawyer or lawyers. There are many kinds of civil cases, including adoptions, bankruptcies, wills, divorces, custody disputes, and evictions. Now, let's see who the people are in a typical civil court.
Judge.
I am the judge. In a civil case, I listen to both sides. I listen to the plaintiff and I listen to the defendant. Most times, the jury decides which side is right. Sometimes there is no jury, and I will decide which side is right.
Jury foreperson. We are the jury. I am one person from the jury. The jury picked me to be the foreman. I speak for the jury. The court appoints the jury, all of us, for the purpose of watching the whole trial. In a civil case, after the lawyers are finished with their case, we, the jury, meet to discuss and decide which side is right. Plaintiff.
I am the plaintiff. I have filed a complaint in this civil case. Defendant and I have different opinions.
Plaintiff's attorney.
I am the plaintiff's attorney. My job is to help the plaintiff explain the story. I will try to show that the plaintiff is right and the defendant is wrong.
Civil defendant. I am a civil defendant. I am in court to give an answer to the plaintiff's complaint and tell my side of the story. The plaintiff and I have a disagreement. I think the plaintiff is wrong, and I owe the plaintiff nothing. Civil defendant's attorney. I am the defendant's attorney. My job is to help the defendant explain the story. I will try to show that the plaintiff is wrong and the defendant is right. Witness. I am a witness. In court, I swear to tell the truth, and then I tell what I saw or heard. In a civil case, what a witness says may be important to the plaintiff or the defendant. The plaintiff can call its own witnesses, and the defendant can call different witnesses. Bailiff. I am the bailiff. It is my job to make sure the courtroom is safe for all. I also make sure everyone is sitting in the right place. I help the judge ensure that everything in the courtroom proceeds smoothly. Court reporter.
I am the court reporter. My job is to type every word that is said in court for the record so that everyone can read it and know what happened in court. I also help the court to monitor all papers, photographs, guns, or other evidence given to the court for a trial.
Interpreter.
I am the interpreter. The court hires me to interpret. I am neutral and am not involved in the case. If anything is spoken in court, I interpret it into sign language for a deaf or hard of hearing person to understand. Anything that is signed in court, I interpret into spoken English for the hearing people to understand. Now we have looked at each of the important people you might see in a courtroom. We will now see how a criminal case proceeds and how a civil case proceeds.
Criminal court.
Now let's look at a criminal court case. Remember, a criminal action means that a person has violated the law against the community. Examples of criminal actions include assault, robbery, rape, drugs, and murder.
All rise. You may be seated. Your Honor, I am the attorney for the state. This case is the state versus the defendant, Robert Peterson. The defendant is charged with reckless driving which caused property damage to a parked car. On September 25th, while he was driving a car, the defendant swerved into a parked car. When the defendant drove and hit the parked car, the accident was witnessed. The parked car is owned by Bill Mitchell. Despite hitting the parked car, the defendant did not stop the car but left the scene. Police investigated the accident and found out that the driver was the defendant, Robert Peterson. The police later arrested the defendant. The defendant cooperated with the police. At this time, we ask the court to find the defendant guilty of reckless driving and leaving the scene of an accident. For punishment, we ask the court to order that he pay a fine of $5,000. Mr. Robert Peterson, defendant, to the two charges of reckless driving and leaving the scene of an accident, how do you plead? Guilty or not guilty?
Your Honor, my name is Susan Stone. I represent the defendant, Robert Peterson. Mr. Peterson pleads guilty for both charges.
Let the record show that defendant Robert Peterson has made pleas of guilty on both charges, reckless driving and leaving the scene of an accident. Now, Mr. Peterson, has your lawyer advised you of your rights? Yes. Do you understand your rights? Yes. Have you and your lawyer discussed your rights and options? Yes. Is there anything that you would like to state for the record, Mr. Peterson?
Your Honor, I would like to ask for leniency in sentencing of Mr. Peterson for a few reasons that I would like to present.
Does the prosecutor have any objections? The state has no objections, Your Honor. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. My client, Robert Peterson, was unaware at the time that he had hit a parked car while he was driving his car. The reason he did not know this was because a child was playing with a ball, and the ball bounced into the street, and this distracted him. Mr. Peterson knew this was a neighborhood with many families and children, so he was driving slowly. When Mr. Peterson was distracted and driving slowly, his car hit Mr. Mitchell's parked car. But Mr. Peterson did not feel any impact. Mr. Peterson is deaf and did not hear the impact. Because he did not realize there was an accident, he drove home. When he arrived home, he started unloading groceries from the rear of the car and did not notice the damage to the side of his car. He first found out about the damage in an accident when the police arrived at his house and told him. I would like to also inform the court that Mr. Peterson has always been a very careful driver. He has been driving for more than 50 years, and in that time has not had any tickets, no speeding ticket or any other kind of ticket. For these reasons, I feel the court should be lenient. Mr. Peterson has valid insurance coverage, and his coverage will resolve all damages to Mr. Mitchell's car. What you just saw was an example of a criminal case.
Civil court.
A civil court case involves actions that occur against a person or the person's property. Remember, a criminal action means that a person violated the law against the community. A civil action is a dispute between two people. Some examples of civil cases include adoption, bankruptcy, wills, evictions, divorce, and medical malpractice. Let's look at a civil case. In the matter of Smith versus Smith, please identify yourselves. Hello, Your Honor. I am here to represent the plaintiff in this request for dissolution of marriage.
Your Honor, I am the attorney representing Mr. Smith, the defendant.
Attorney for the plaintiff, please tell me what this case involves. Your Honor, my client has lived in Oxville, Ohio for the last 6 months. They have not produced any children, nor have they adopted any children. Mr. and Mrs. Smith have lived separately for the past year. They own no real estate together. Since they have been separated, each should be responsible for their own debts. Attorney for defendant, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct, Your Honor.
All right. I am entering an order granting the parties a dissolution of marriage. In a divorce, the judge listens to both sides and then enters an order which is the final outcome of the case.
Courtroom etiquette and your responsibilities.
Now that you understand who everyone is and what they do, let's make sure you know what to do when you go to court. Remember that any time you are going to court, you or your lawyer will need to contact the court ahead of time to formally request an interpreter, real-time captioning, assistive listening device, or other communication access. You can request those communication tools through a clerk of the court, someone at the court interpreter's office, a disability rights coordinator, or a person in charge of that court's proceedings. It is best if you notify the court at least a week before the court date, so that a person in charge can make arrangements to have an interpreter, real-time captioning, assistive listening device, or other communication access available for you. When you enter a courtroom, remove your hat. It is also important to wear nice clothes, like nice slacks and a nice shirt, or a suit or a dress. This shows respect for the judge.
I am deaf. Thank you.
If you have a traffic ticket or are involved in a case but do not have a lawyer, go to the court and find the court clerk. When you meet the court clerk, show your traffic ticket or court papers so that the clerk of courts knows you are there. You should already have requested an interpreter ahead of time. If you did request an interpreter before the court date, ask the court clerk where the interpreter is. I am the interpreter for your court case. Nice to meet you.
I am hard of hearing. Thank you.
If you need an assistive listening device, real-time captioning, or other equipment, make sure to let the court know, at least 1 week before the court date, about what you will need to be able to understand the proceedings.
Please put away the newspaper and pay attention to the court. I'm sorry.
When you are in the courtroom, sit down and wait for the court to call your name. Pay attention to the interpreter or to the captioning or listen with the assistive listening device. When you are in the courtroom, do not make loud noises, do not talk, and do not read the newspaper or a book. Mrs. Smith. When your name is called, approach the judge. The interpreter will follow you and stand in a place so that you can see him or her. Usually the court will ask the interpreter to give his or her name and to be sworn in so that the court has a record that the interpreter can interpret accurately. When the judge is sitting on the bench, make sure that when you talk to the judge, you address the judge as Your Honor. If you do not have an attorney and want one, you need to tell the judge that you are requesting that an attorney be appointed to represent you. If you are in a court proceeding and a lawyer is asking you questions, always pay attention and answer the questions truthfully.
The Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, and your rights.
Now that you understand what you should do while in court, let's talk about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is often called the ADA. Throughout this video, you watched a courtroom of people who all knew sign language. Of course, you will not find such a courtroom in the real world. What you will most likely find is a courtroom that has hearing people who do not know sign language. You need to make sure that you get the communication access to understand what is happening in the courtroom. The ADA is a law that has been in place since 1990. The ADA is a federal law that all states have to follow. The ADA requires equal access for people with disabilities, including people who are deaf and hard of hearing. The ADA is broken down into 4 sections called titles. Title I covers people with disabilities in the workplace. Employers must make reasonable accommodations for workers who have disabilities. For example, the provision of a TTY, closed captioning, interpreter, and amplified phone. Title II covers equal access to state and local government agencies, including schools, courts, prisons, parks, and libraries. Title II is very important for this video because it is the part of ADA that requires the courts to provide equal access for the deaf and hard of hearing. Title III covers places of business, such as a doctor's office, lawyer's office, hotels, theaters, restaurants, private schools, conferences, nonprofit organizations, daycare centers, and any business open to the public. For Title II and Title III, if a deaf or hard of hearing person requires accommodation to understand the service being offered, then that change must be provided. For example, if you require an interpreter to get effective communication, the court must provide an interpreter. If you meet with a lawyer and an interpreter is required to have effective communication, the lawyer must provide an interpreter. The deaf person should never pay for the cost of the interpreter in those situations. Title IV establishes the relay service in all 50 states and with all national telephone companies. The relay service makes sure that deaf, hard of hearing, and other people with disabilities can have conversations through the telephone system using the relay system with a hearing person. This service is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Any person can use this service as many times as needed. Now, the most important part of ADA. How does a court decide what you need to help understand its proceedings and to help you communicate? You must tell them. It is your responsibility to tell them. You must tell the court what you need to understand the court proceedings. If you require a sign language interpreter, the ADA says that the court must provide a qualified sign language interpreter. The interpreter must be effective, meaning that you can understand the interpreter and the interpreter can understand you. The interpreter must also be accurate, which means that the right information is interpreted correctly. The interpreter must also be impartial, which means that a family member of the deaf person cannot be the interpreter. The interpreter needs to be able to use the right sign vocabulary to make sure that you understand the court proceedings. If you require assistive listening equipment, the ADA requires that the court provide any such equipment to help you understand the proceedings. If you require captioning, the ADA says that the court must provide it. It is very important for you to understand what happens while you are in court, and you have a right, under the ADA, to understand everything that happens in the courtroom. We hope this video has been helpful to you, and that you know enough about court now so that if you have to go to court for any reason, you will know what to do. Please remember, request your communication access. Interpreter, real-time captioning, assistive listening device or other equipment at least 1 week before the court date. Please wear formal clothes and take off your hat when you are inside the court. Always treat the judge with respect and say, "Your Honor," to the judge. If you have a lawyer, let the lawyer do the talking for you. If you have questions about a court, the court's process, lawyers, or other matters covered in this video, please contact the Midwest Center on Law and the Deaf.
Midwest Center on Law and the Deaf, MCLD. P.O. Box 804297, Chicago, Illinois 60680. 800-894-3653, TTY. 800-894-3654, voice. 312-726-7182, fax. mcld1@aol.com. Email. http://www.mcld.org. Website.